So I think we will start, and we'll start with some words from the Bible. Proverbs 4:5, get wisdom, get understanding. Don't forget or turn away from the words of my mouth. And the mind of a person with discernment gets knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. We are asking for discernment and knowledge from the leaders of the financial institutions tonight. And I just thought I would do another reading about why we need to get wisdom and people need to be doing this. A prayer to God. Please save both humans and animals, flesh, soul, and spirit, tissue, bone, and skin that form shapes, images, and figures. Save the human whose glory is fleeting, so like animals, but beautiful, handsome, and upright. Renew the face of the earth, the trees that breathe, the olive groves, and the fields of grain, grape arbors, and fruit orchards planted on the famed earth, with dew-yielding fragrant bounty and rain-sustaining life. Many plants grow tall and come jealously into their own. Let flowers birth forced, emerging in fullness. Let cold rain stem down, pouring rain down on the canals, exalting the earth, suspended in the ether. Please save us, God. And it's not just God save us, but we also need to have the financial industries save us, and save us from the fossil fuel industries. So we're going to be talking about a topic that we haven't spoken about before, and that's the importance of thinking about the financial industry in terms of how the financial industry is so important to the fossil fuel industry, because they're the ones that are funding it. So we have with us two people from Sierra Club. We have Ben Cushing, who is the director of Sierra Club's National Fossil-Free Finance Campaign. And we have Robin Mann, who's also a local Philadelphia Sierra Club person. And she's going to be they're both going to be talking about the importance of paying attention to the financial industry, the role we can play, and we also will have a call to action at the end that relates to this, as well as there's lots of organizations that are working on this. So Ben is apologizing that he's not going to have his picture on camera, but he does sort of have his picture. It's not going to be a live picture. So Ben, if you would like to take it away and talk to us about Sierra Club's fossil-free finance campaign, and also the reason why this is so important. And thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great, okay. Yeah, well, first off, thanks so much for having me and for the invitation. And I apologize, I was not able to be near my computer right now, and so joining mobily, but really glad to be talking to you all and share a bit about our work. And yeah, happy to answer any questions. I'll need to jump a little bit before the 7:30 mark, so I'll try to give a quick overview and hopefully leave some time for questions. And apologies for any background noise. And I mentioned to Phyllis that I'm happy to share follow-up links for further information, which I'm sure will get passed around. So yeah, so I'm based in Washington, D.C. I direct Sierra Club's fossil-free finance campaign, which is our work that is focused on the financial sector and major Wall Street firms here in the U.S. So primarily that's looking at the role of big banks and large asset managers and the financial system that is fueling and propping up fossil fuel expansion. So, the problem that we are working to confront, which I'm sure is very familiar to you all, is that the continued expansion of fossil fuel exploration and development is not compatible with the global goals that we need to reach to stave off the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And major financial institutions, including the largest banks in the US and the world. So here, talking about JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. So those types of household names, many of which, we are probably customers of, might have a checking account or credit card, as well as large asset managers, which are sometimes less household names, but I'm sure especially a company like Vanguard is very familiar to you all in Pennsylvania. But Vanguard and BlackRock and Fidelity, State Street, others that manage 401ks and pension plans on behalf of individuals and institutions and cities and states and so on. And these institutions, in different ways, both banks and asset managers, especially the largest US institutions, are the biggest funders of fossil fuels in the world. They're the largest shareholders of fossil fuel company stocks. They're the largest lenders. They're the largest buyers of corporate debt and underwriting of that debt. So without them, fossil fuel industry, would not be able to access readily available, relatively cheap capital that fuels their operations and enables their expansion. And we do research along with a number of other groups that demonstrates, the scale and scope of these financial institutions' investments in the fossil fuel industry and in fossil fuel expansion. I'm happy to share some of those resources. And I think, I mentioned, but just to really underscore that I think this is particularly a US problem. And I think that points to our obligation and our opportunity to take on this issue. The biggest US financial institutions, many of which are based in New York City, obviously, but some like Vanguard are in the Philadelphia suburbs, are the largest financiers of fossil fuels by a wide margin compared to other countries. And so I think it is really an urgent and important opportunity we have before us as US-based climate activists to confront this challenge. The good news is that we have been making some progress on this front in recent years. And when I started doing this work a number of years ago, we were really trying to challenge the notion that this wasn't just the problem of the fossil fuel industry, but actually the financial industry in enabling and propping up that those destructive practices and their plans for expansion. And I think a major change that we've seen in recent years that is really encouraging is that major financial institutions around the world, all the big US financial institutions I named, have all at least nominally committed to addressing their climate issues and aligning their financing practices with the goals of the Paris Agreement. You've probably seen lots of headlines about big banks and other corporate institutions committing to net zero by 2050 and things like that. And certainly, we all know that there is quite a bit of greenwashing that goes on with those types of commitments, but it can't be taken for granted that we've seen a major change just in the last few years with it no longer really being tenable for major financial institutions to not have basic climate commitments. And the challenge, of course, now is to actually make sure that those commitments mean something and that they follow through and that they align with the scientific consensus that shows that in order to actually achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and achieve net zero by 2050, we need to reduce and ultimately phase out financing for new fossil fuel development. So that's sort of the big challenge and solution. And we're working towards that goal in a number of different ways as the Sierra Club, and with a large and growing coalition of partner organizations aiming to move the largest banks and asset managers to action through grassroots organizing, advocacy, through shareholder activism, through public policy and regulatory engagement at the federal and state level. And so there's a lot of ways in which we are seeking to push this agenda forward. And I think particularly for you all, given my understanding of where you're based in the Philly and maybe broader Pennsylvania area, certainly the work that Sierra Club and allies are doing in the state to push Vanguard in particular, given their headquarters and presence in the state, I think is a really interesting and urgent opportunity, and I can talk a bit more about that. But I would highlight a couple moments for kind of near-term action that I think might interest folks. So one that maybe you've heard of is around shareholder activism. So folks on this call may have prior experience doing shareholder activism with corporations, and of course major banks like JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America, Wells Fargo, et cetera, are themselves publicly traded companies. And so one of the key strategies that the Sierra Club and the Sierra Club Foundation and other allied investors and advocacy groups are focused on is filing and supporting shareholder resolutions at major banks that call for them to adopt policies and targets that will better align their financial practices with the net zero commitments that they've already made. And this is an opportunity where I think there is a really nice way for advocates at the state and local level, especially, to plug in, because there is a real opportunity to ask major institutional shareholders to vote in favor of those resolutions. And that includes large state pension funds, state treasurers, and other public financial officials. So in Pennsylvania, that could mean the state treasurers, that could mean state and municipal public pension funds who manage public funds that are themselves invested in companies and are likely significant shareholders of big banks. And so they have a vote. And in many cases, they also have a voice in influencing large asset managers like Vanguard, who are paid by states. I don't know the exact relationship with the state of Pennsylvania, for instance, but many states, potentially Pennsylvania, contract out their fund management to a company like Vanguard. And then Vanguard uses its millions of shares in companies to vote for shareholder resolutions, including climate-related measures. And so this is, one example of tangible action that we can push for and that people can take. And this is relatively near term on the horizon. So corporations in the US hold their annual shareholder meetings in the spring, usually in April and May. And so one thing that we'll be doing over the next few months is, as those shareholder resolutions are announced more publicly, we will be encouraging Sierra Club members in states across the country, including Pennsylvania and our allies, to call on financial officials at the state and local level to support those resolutions, as well as to push on the major private sector asset managers like Vanguard and BlackRock and Fidelity and others who hold the biggest stake in those companies to take action. And so I think that's one action opportunity that we'd be happy to share more follow-up information about, that I think is an exciting and meaningful near-term opportunity. The other that I would highlight, and again can share further information about this, you may have heard Bill McKibben's new organization, Third Act. One of their big campaigns that they're working on is related to banks, and the Sierra Club and others are working closely with them on that campaign. And they have circled March 23rd, which I think is a nice palindrome, 3/23/23, if I got that right, for a big national day of action focused on the 4 largest banks in the US. So again, that being JP Morgan Chase, Citi, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and calling on both customers of those institutions and everyone else alike to join a day of action. So I can follow up with more information, but I think even if you just go to Third Act's website, I'm sure you'll find a link pretty immediately to sign up for that day of action and find ways to get involved locally. And if there's not already an action being planned in your area, you might want to consider adding one. And Sierra Club will be encouraging our membership to join that day of action. And of course, our work doesn't stop there, but I think it will be an important and exciting day, especially after the last couple of years when many of our plans for in-person rallies and offline gatherings have been hard to pull off. So we're eagerly looking forward to that, and I'd encourage you all to check that out. So I'll stop there for now. Hopefully that was a helpful quick overview of what we're working on and why this issue is important. And the last thing I would say is just, I think there is really a growing and exciting movement in the US and more globally focused on the role of the financial sector in the climate crisis. And there are a lot of ways to plug in. I've highlighted a couple of them here, but Sierra Club is part of broader coalitions and networks of groups, some of which are really focused in your area there in Pennsylvania, some of which are more national. And I think this is a really exciting new part of the movement. So yeah, happy to take a couple questions, and yeah, appreciate your time.
Just unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one.
Ben, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm entirely on board with everything that you're doing. Here in Philadelphia, we have made progress for an alternative to the Wall Street banks that you've been talking about, and that is to create a public bank, a municipal bank for Philadelphia. In that regard, we have passed legislation to establish the Philadelphia Public Financial Authority. It was passed back on March 17th of 22. Unfortunately, Mayor Kenny has refused to implement the law. And in that way, he has deprived support for the Philadelphia Green Capital Corporation, which is an affiliate of the Philadelphia Energy Authority, and the ability of the financial authority to respond to the climate disruption and the environmental crisis that we're in. So I'm wondering if Sierra Club has connected with the folks at the Public Banking Institute on a national basis, Walt McCree and Ellen Brown. They can connect you with things nationally, all the work that's being done in California, where 10 municipal banks are being set up, the work to create state banks in California and Pennsylvania, and which is a little bit moribund. But New Jersey is very active as part of Phil Murphy's platform, New York, Massachusetts, New Mexico, Washington State. So if you haven't, I would urge you to reach out and connect with them, or connect with me, and I will connect you with them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll say a couple quick things. One, yes, I would appreciate follow-up further connection. I'm definitely aware of the public banking issue and that strategy that is really exciting and important. Admittedly, that has not been a major focus of our work to date in terms of local public bank campaigns. Frankly, not for any, any reason against it, is just probably more of a capacity question of where we focused our energy and strategy. I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle. I would say that while alternative types of institutions and public banks are really important and very much applaud that, I think we are going to still, unfortunately, be stuck with the major Wall Street banks regardless, even if we pass a bunch. I think it is incumbent in our advocacy work to look to address the destructive practices and unsustainable financing.
I absolutely agree with,
yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. In Philadelphia and elsewhere, not just in Pennsylvania, but in the country, Wells Fargo has ripped off its customers by setting up bogus accounts and charging them. We've been ripped off by a consortium of the Wall Street investment banks, colluding to make our interest rates on our municipal bonds higher than they need to be, to the tune of millions of dollars. So these are bad actors, and I'm really happy that you're calling them to account.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I would love more information. I think it's definitely a both and type of approach. But yeah, it's really important.
Phyllis, can I just it's more of a comment for Ben. This is Robin Mann. Hi, Ben. I wondered if you wanted to just speak briefly to the kind of aggressive anti-ESG activity going on in the States, trying to stop the banks and asset managers from embracing, climate commitments.
Yes, thanks for that prompt, Robin. I should have mentioned that earlier. Yeah, so just quickly, folks may have seen some headlines in recent months about this campaign being waged really at the state level in Republican-led states, so-called anti-ESG policy, ESG being environmental social governance investing, which is kind of a catch-all term that has been muddled a lot in the public debate. But basically the upshot is that because of the progress that has been made in pushing financial institutions to take more accountability of their climate impacts and risks, the Republican Party, really acting at the behest of the fossil fuel industry, has been taking action to try to use state level political power to punish them and coerce them into not following through on their climate commitments. So I think, I off the top of my head, I don't know exactly kind of where Pennsylvania falls in terms of some of these bills that have been introduced in different states. If I'm not mistaken, Pennsylvania has a Republican legislature, but a Democratic governor. Is that right?
Mhm.
Not anymore.
We have a tiny Democratic majority in the House.
Okay, great. Well, I think one thing particularly at the state level there to keep an eye out for if it hasn't happened already, and I can look into this, is if any of these types of bills, which are, really these like model bills being passed around from state to state by groups like ALEC and the Heritage Foundation and others that are basically trying to prevent financial institutions from making progress on climate. And so it sounds like, perhaps that wouldn't be able to pass and be signed by the governor in Pennsylvania anyways, but and keeping an eye out for that, not only to kind of play defense on that, but potentially if there is the political will to do so, one thing we're looking at doing is encouraging states with Democratic leadership to actually advance policies in the other direction that would support sustainable investing in financial reforms. So yeah, thanks for that, Robin. And I can also follow up with a link to a piece that I wrote about this last month that should give folks a bit of a summary.
So Ben needs to go in a minute or two, and I wonder if anybody else has any questions for him.
I have one. Just wondering, it would be interesting to know if Penn State's investments are in Vanguard, because it would be a way to unite across campuses if they are, to work on that. Anyone know?
That's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head, but that's a yeah, if anyone knows, but that could also be a question I can bring back to some colleagues.
Is Penn State part of TIAA?
I think they are.
Well, I was just checking my investments today from my university and from TIAA, and I was amazed that 2/3 of them were Vanguard funds. So unless Penn State has gone out of their way to make sure they're not using Vanguard funds, I think TIAA uses Vanguard funds as a default.
Thank you.
So Ben, I do have a question for you. Can you explain what the big hoopla was about Vanguard pulling out of the net zero and what net zero means? And is this greenwashing or is this real?
Yeah, that's a big question. I will try to give my 1 minute answer. But basically there was a alliance of asset managers that was announced a couple of years ago at the UN climate talks called the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. And this was connected to other climate initiatives by other parts of the financial sector. So with banks and insurance companies and others. I think the big picture takeaway is that while that initiative was certainly not strong enough and viewed by some as somewhat greenwashing, I think it was still an important alliance of big asset managers, including Vanguard, kind of under one umbrella, committed to at least minimal climate action. And in response, basically, to this political pressure that I mentioned a minute ago, Vanguard, a couple months ago, announced that they were dropping out of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. So we pretty forcefully condemned that move, as did others. And I think, certainly points the way toward there needing to be further pressure and accountability for Vanguard on that. And I think just, shows that, underscores that they really have a long ways to go on getting their house in order on climate issues. So that's the quick summary of that, and happy to share with you our public statement after that happened.
And many other organizations also.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ben. I know that you've got to go back to family matters, and thank you very much for giving us time tonight. We're not done though. And I want to
Yeah.
just talk about some of the things that are going on in the chat.
Thank you all. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
So Peter already talked about what he put in with the Philadelphia Public Finance Authority, which is a precursor to the Philadelphia Public Bank, and how it's hung up again. Noel, do you want to tell us a little bit about aspiration, and Jackie to talk about bankforgood.org? That would be helpful for all of us. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I think I found Aspiration online a little while ago. It's kind of an online financial institution and committed to, I guess, divestment from fossil fuels, and none of their financing goes towards fossil fuel development. It would all go towards green energy solutions. So that's the reason I found it. I don't know enough about it to recommend that anyone go there, other than just check it out as an option, as a viable option to some place to do your checking or savings or whatever. But yeah, it was just I put a little there just to test it out, and that's what I'm doing now, just kind of seeing how it operates. I have a debit card from it, and yeah, so just something to potentially consider. I'm not saying I know enough to even recommend it as your banking solution, other than to say they won't invest in fossil fuels, and all of their investments goes towards sustainable practices. Yeah.
Thank you. And Jackie, what is bankforgood.org?
It's a website that lists different kinds of banks and credit unions that they can be minority owned or Latinx owned. You can put in different filters, and I know Aspiration is on their site for ones that don't invest in fossil fuels. There were 5. You have to look at them and see whether they have ATMs in your area, because they're not necessarily national banks. They're in different locations. Some are in the Midwest, California, Florida, New York. But there are different filters, and you can put in whatever you're interested in. And I thought it was really helpful to look at that. So that's something to check out.
A while ago, I opened an account with the Clean Energy Credit Union. It's out of Colorado. And I know it's on that site also. And they only do loaning to people who want to buy something that's clean energy. So it might be somebody who wants to buy electric car. They would loan for that. They would loan for even electric bike or solar panels or something of this nature. And that's the entire purpose of their loans. They are based in Colorado, and they're totally online. And as you say, ATMs are an issue because they don't have any. I don't remember, to be honest, whether they're part of an ATM network that's in the Philadelphia area or the Pennsylvania area or not. But I use it as an account that I don't have to worry about an ATM type of thing, because I use it for making automatic withdrawals and that sort of stuff, and writing checks. It's not my cash account. Anybody else know of any other good banks?
I have to say, I bank online with Ally, and I don't know what they invest in. But it would be an interesting exercise to know. I have a savings account there, and then I have a local bank, but I need to check out more of what they invest in. If anybody knows, let me know.
Does anybody know about Philadelphia Federal Credit Union? I have my savings and checking and credit card with them.
Credit unions should disclose what their banking practices are, who they loan to.
Phyllis, I have a question for the group, if I may. And the question is, would anybody be interested in participating in a divestiture movement to move money locally in Philadelphia? for example, to a minority-owned bank that was committed to programs that would mitigate climate conditions and, locally.
Are you asking for individual actions or are you asking for us
I'm
to?
asking if people would be
collectively?
interested in participating, yes, in acting and participating in a divestiture movement to move money into a minority-owned bank in their locality. Or in Philadelphia, let's say, where we're planning to make that happen.
Holly says yes.
Hi, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so is this bank online?
This is perspective, and the bank would have, yes, the bank would be located in Philadelphia, but there's no reason that you couldn't have an account if you're living in Pittsburgh or
Yes,
anywhere else in the world.
yeah, I'd be interested.
Great, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
And Holly also mentioned Dollar Bank of Pittsburgh.
Yes, but I'm not sure to whom they loan, but of the banks here in Pittsburgh, like PNC Bank is definitely a business bank. Mellon is too, but Dollar Bank, they probably do businesses, but I'm not sure if it's an international business that they deal with. I wouldn't even know where to find that out.
Well, PNC is a bank, I believe, that went around having green roofs. And I'm in the Lehigh Valley, and I asked them something about why, when you build PNC up in this area, you didn't put in these roofs. And my understanding is that Philadelphia was kind of requiring it or something, and so they did it. And that means that, the city itself kind of did something that we didn't do around here at all. But these roofs are, they're, grass and plants up on the roof there. And plus they have their banks set up so that they get a lot of light that helps with the heating. I mean, they did things that would be energy efficient and kind of pretty impressive. And they may even have some monies. As I recollect, I was trying to get some money or something from them, but they sounded like they were more interested in Philadelphia for different things. So PNC might be maybe you could help that. Maybe they may be
Are you
more
saying
flexible.
Are you saying that PNC Bank went LEED certifiable? That means that they build their branches.
This is years ago. So
okay.
I can't remember exactly, but they were doing things to be of that nature, if not totally to the letter.
Okay.
So they were trying to be that way.
Peg, if you'll remember, the Earthquaker Action Team, Equate, had a campaign against PNC Bank in opposition to their financing of mountaintop coal mining, where they were just stripping the land and removing mountaintops to get at the coal, underneath. And
John Grisham wrote a book that showed the horrors of that. But yes, sorry, I interject here. But yeah.
So Equate went after, a Quaker activist, as we all know, don't mess with the Quakers. And they took on PNC Bank and beat them to the ground, and PNC Bank finally surrendered and stopped financing mountaintop coal mining, and made some good gestures in terms of being a good corporate citizen, responsible corporate citizen, and having some decent responses to climate disruption.
So there may be some more room to work with them.
Yes,
is my thought. Yeah.
right. And they would not want to repeat the experience they had with Equate. So, a company that I run maintains accounts with PNC Bank.
I have a question about, does anybody know how to go about finding what like life insurance companies invest in? Because that's another area to check.
They all invest in the fossil fuels, or at least most of them do, and that's another area that people are talking about changing. That we've got to educate the insurance companies. The big insurance companies definitely are part of that.
Phyllis, this is Robin, can I just speak to that for a second? I wanted to flag just a couple of things that'll be emerging, as focus areas. One is the Securities and Exchange Commission is promulgating a rule about financial disclosure related to climate risk. And I know the Sierra Club and Sierra Club Foundation are involved in trying to push for a stronger rule. But meanwhile, there's tremendous pushback about companies needing to disclose risk, just saying that this is bogus and has nothing to do with, financial health and the fiduciary obligations of companies. And so it's going to be an important, sort of public debate about what companies do need to disclose about climate risk. And so that'll be something that's in the headlines. And I can certainly share at the point that we're sort of mobilizing comments, to push for a stronger rule. I can certainly share that with you. I'll just note that meanwhile, this issue is also front and center for the anti-ESG campaign that Ben was speaking of. The red states, and the dark money folks, they're advocating that all this ESG stuff and concern about climate is just irrelevant to, the financial matters and doesn't belong, to be at all constraining, pension fund investments and that kind of thing. And so the more that I think we can underscore that, we're seeing climate impacts daily, companies are at risk in all kinds of ways, and to just sort of underscore that reality is going to be really important. Thanks.
Phyllis, I had a question.
Mhm.
I used to work at Temple University Hospital, so I'm heavily into life insurance, IRA, retirement funds with TIAA Craft, and you mentioned that company. Now, you say that they're heavily invested in fossil fuels, because I think I tried to find out and was told that no, they're not.
I went down my listing today of every single stock that I have, every mutual fund listing, and many, many, many of them were Vanguard mutual funds. So that's the way to find out if you're invested, to go to the site itself and to actually check on accounts and go down that list. Because in the past, it was always been like, well, they're TIA mutual funds, but they're not. There's a lot of Vanguard mutual funds in there.
And the Vanguard has a lot of fossil fuels. Is that it? So it's sort of like layered down in there.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
If you really have to, I was priding myself on not being part of Vanguard until today. And then I realized, oops, I am definitely very much put my money into Vanguard.
And Vanguard has huge holdings in the banks that are directly funding the fossil fuel expansion.
Right. So I just put something in the chat about the day of action. It is March 21st, 2023. Together, we will help make visible the invisible connection between cash and carbon. We will pressure the big, dirty fossil fuel banks, Bank of America, Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, to move their investments out of fossil fuel by moving our money out of their banks, actually and symbolically. I think one of the things we're going to be doing is coming together and cutting our credit cards together. And obviously Vanguard is one of them in Philly that we're going to be working on too. So discredit bad banks' day of action. The next exclamation point in our work is to defund climate crisis is coming this spring, and we want everybody to join in. And before I forget, I just want to make a point that earlier in the thing I talked about two calls for action. One has to do with the petition on methane, and Peg would like to also talk about methane. So if you don't know that methane is natural gas, you might have heard it on the radio that now there was this big pushback about gas stoves and gas heating and gas everything else. And of course, Biden had to really rethink his steps about this, because it's the Republicans, then they fought, the gas industry are huge, and they pushed back. So we have there's a EPA has they have a request for comments about methane, and I put this in the chat a while ago for you just to sign a petition, but you can also write a letter. And Peg would like to talk about what EDF is doing in terms of methane, because it's a very exciting development.
Is that right now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yes, several years ago, EDF planned to put a satellite into space that would monitor the emissions throughout the world. And as we know, a lot of people, countries, industries, and so forth, it's not what me worry, it's what me, I take good care, no problem. Well, they're really going to be able to drill down, no pun intended, and focus on where emissions from methane are coming from. It's supposed to come out in 2023. They've had this rolling for a couple of years. I tried to find out from Washington when it's going to be launched. They're not totally sure, but I think originally the idea was around October, and then they were going to, there may be some delays. But the reason I even bring this up is, yes, we've got people like Elon Musk who's sending a fraction of the 1%ers into space for sort of a very special experience or something. But here's something I think is of worldwide importance. And my thought is that we should have a worldwide celebration on the launching of that satellite. Raise a glass of ginger ale or champagne, do it zooming, maybe have some folks in Washington making a bit of a splash, but put emphasis and attention in a way that they seem to put on Musk, just for opening his mouth about space, something really important. So that could be sort of a fun thing for people to do that also would bring focus, because they say methane has 80 times the impact as the same amount of just regular carbon, I guess, if I'm saying that properly. But if we could kind of, and if maybe local areas could do a little something, have a Zooming group. One of the people in CCL that I had a meeting with recently, turns out the guy's a rocket scientist that worked with NASA and everything. And he's done all this stuff. And I asked him to maybe collect some of his aeronautical buddies and do a Zoom piece. So I'm just thinking that if we could kind of spread this idea, it could be a fun, impactful thing. The only restriction is we shouldn't have fireworks. So that's the end of my thought.
You know what, Peg? You have my email address. When we get closer to the date of the launch, and we know it's actually taking place because we know EDF has postponed it a few times, you and I will plan something.
Okay, and I am going to be in communication with Jeremy in Washington, who's going to try and update me, because I looked through their literature thinking, oh, gee, I must have missed something, but it hasn't been pinned down yet. But just if people can kind of start getting some ideas and thinking about it.
Peg, I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. So a recent brainstorm.
So Jackie just put something else in the chat. Invest your values is as you sow. It's a great tool. I've used that tool. That's how I found the credit union that I was investing in. So do check it out. Any other comments from this very well knowledgeable and informed group?
I'm going to
I
suggest
had a
that.
question,
Oh, sorry.
excuse me. Peg, if they're going to shoot those things up and they're going to find who's going to actually putting all methane into the atmosphere, do they have a working way of getting after the companies that are doing this so that they actually reduce their amount or pay for it or whatever? So many of the companies that are gotten after for methane simply pay their fine and say, oh, it's just a business expense.
Looks like Peg is frozen. I think it's supposed, with the money from the, at least in the United States, there is money from the feds to be paying, begin to be paying for these things. So once we identify them, hopefully they're going to be able to be paid, to be fixed. But I totally agree with you. It's just a business expense. I'll pay my fine and continue polluting. Last night, there was a coalition of several Pennsylvania organizations, Penn Environment, Penn Future, Clean Air Council, et cetera, talking about methane. And there was a little video of somebody who was outside of Pittsburgh, I think in Allegheny County, but I'm not quite sure, who discovered a leaking, I don't know what it was. I think it was natural gas, but at any rate, and they contacted the company and the company actually fixed it. So it was a nice, good story. But the money to fix these things is far less than what's been appropriated. And there's an awful lot of orphan wells and orphan oil rigs that nobody owns anymore, nobody cares about, and they're leaking also.
Weren't they saying last night that it's like 78,000 to fix one of those little things? It's not a cheap job.
No, it's not.
But there's a huge amount of federal funding now to do abandoned well leak, closures. So it's important that Pennsylvania actually steps up and uses that money. But I mean, Phyllis, you mentioned the methane rule. I mean, that's one of the ways to force, active fossil gas producers to rein in their pollution. So we need the strongest rule possible.
Absolutely. I think in Pennsylvania, once the rule is passed, I understand that Pennsylvania will need to develop an implementation plan, which is, and then I guess the EPA reviews it. I wasn't 100% clear when they talked about that, but that's also, as Pennsylvania, something we will really need to monitor, because obviously the interest of the fossil fuel industry is really involved in our legislature in Harrisburg. So more to come on that one.
Well, Nancy, you could not have planned it better, because I wanted to announce that our program for February 15th at 7 o'clock is what can Pennsylvania hope to achieve and hope to make progress on. And certainly methane and orphan wells is a big part of it. And Fiona Cardini from Penn Environment will be our speaker. So this is one that we can certainly ask about, and we can pressure her as part of Penn Environment to be working on this. She will be having her annual lobbying day in June again, that she coordinates with Penn Future and a bunch of other organizations, and that's something that we can definitely be pushing on. We need to appropriate money, and we need to enforce it. We need to make sure these things happen.
Phyllis, have you been following what Equate is going to be doing soon? Where they're going up to not Vanguard's executive house, but they're actually going to the facility, and they're asking for volunteers to come help out.
Do you know when that is?
I have it in an email somewhere. I think I
Well,
put
if
it
you
on my
email it to
calendar.
me,
I was
we'll
trying
put
to
it in
find
the-
a way to get there and ride.
That's right. If you email it to me, we can put it in with the resources
Okay.
that we're sharing. there's a lot of organizations that are working on this beside Third Act. There's Fix My Funds, there's Stop the Money Pipeline, Sierra Club. Equate has obviously been doing a huge job on this. And they're all basically talking about the same thing, moving my money away from fossil fuels. So these are all really good organizations to be part of. And in the local area, there's lots and lots of opportunities for going to a demonstration, writing letters, making phone calls. I get things that say, Jamie Dimon's fax machine, and we just send faxes or we call them up. And there was one day that we said, ask for an appointment, and we jammed his screens with asking for appointments. So lots of stuff going on, and because it's such a huge problem, and we really need to push back against the lobbying industry, because they're big and mighty and well funded.
Phyllis, I have a question. I missed the first part of this grant. Was there any talk about, I know banks, but what about reputable asset managers in terms of investing your money in ESG and making it a point not to invest even through the back door like Vanguard? I don't know if that was shared at all.
So first of all, do you want to explain what ESG is?
Sure. With a little bit, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. It is it hasn't been codified, but it's gained a lot of traction. You have to be really careful, because there are companies that say they're ESG and they're not. There's also ones that are environmental, but they may be, governance in terms of diversity, women's rights, family supportive programs. You know what? I look a lot at this organization, Ethical Markets, that Hazel Henderson started. And I get an amazing, they have newsletters multiple times a week. It's a little overwhelming, but I just pick through whatever I think I am interested in. And I would recommend it. And they have given me a lot of resources in this whole area, but not in terms of, well, who should be managing my assets? So I don't have to be tearing my hair out every day with guilt about, I know they're doing something that I don't like them to do.
Well, I found in my list today, in addition to Vanguard, I have stocks in P&G, Procter & Gamble, which we know they're deforesting too much there. And to me, that was like, oh, that was a shock. So I plan to call my investors and my asset managers and say, get me out of Procter & Gamble. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it just takes a huge amount of effort to be looking after this. There are alternative companies for investment that you can really go to that only invest in green companies, or that are much more, they're more consistent in this, but it often is hard to do, because like my money is tied up through where I was employed, and I can't take it out that easily. So Robin, do you want to just give us 1 minute about what locally Sierra Club is going to be doing?
Locally, Sierra Club is involved in a lot of, at the very local level, with our particular focus is the work around the Ready for 100 campaign, which is getting municipalities to embrace a commitment to transition to 100% clean energy, and then adopting a plan to do that, to actually transition municipal facilities from fossil fuel-based heating and cooling, and to transition their electricity, their generator, from fossil fuels to clean energy generation, that kind of thing. And to get the communities to, engage, residents of the communities to engage. So that's a big focus.
Is there any banking initiative?
I'm sorry.
Is there any banking initiative?
Well, I think we'll probably be very involved, in mobilizing folks on, with Vanguard and encouraging people to write to their banks and their investment managers and urge them to vote their shares, appropriately. So that'll be an effort in this regard. And I mean, it's something that we can do with other organizations that we're members of, encouraging them to send letters, because so many of our smaller organizations have, Vanguard accounts. So, and then we'll be doing electoral work in Philadelphia, particularly this year. We don't have a particular focus and, sort of campaign around finance at the Philadelphia level, but, it's certainly possible to, have conversation about those issues as we talk to candidates. So those are some of the things. I don't really have a full grasp of what the local leadership has sort of, set as priorities for the year yet.
So thank you. And Jackie gets the prize for being the resource person champion tonight. She has given us more information. So she says that the Equate is having an action on Wednesday, January 25th, which is of course next week. They're meeting outside the Newtown Square Whole Foods, and they're going to be asking everybody to take a pledge and do other actions. And she puts in the way to get more information. So there's no lack of the ways of getting involved, no lack of things and causes that we all need to be invested in. And de-investing from or divesting our money is an important way of put your money where your mouth is, as my mother used to say. So I want to thank you. We will be getting our a list of resources out to you very soon. Nancy just put in a fossil fuel free fund organization. So we will, when we send out the chat, we'll send out the recording. It'll also have the chat, lots and lots of good information in the chat. And thank you so much for participating and enriching all of us. Bye.